Today, as many people here know, my work has been on forest rights as an academic, but today I'm speaking about rural women and women farmers and agricultural workers, including people in dairy and fisheries and all the associated rural occupations, the people who we like to call women farmers. Yeah. And on behalf of the All India Democratic Women's Association, in whose national secretariat I'm a member, I want to first of all say that we circulated a draft of a 2009 national policy for women in agriculture, which was made by the National Commission of Women, and the subcommittee was headed by our former ADWA president, Malini Bhattacharya. And a lot of us were involved in that. So that has been already circulated. So I don't really want to get into the details of that policy. But I wish to raise a couple of issues which I'm hoping will find more discussion time, since we've been listening from the morning and now we have to speak very fast. So the first point that I'd like to make is, without getting into the history of ADWA's struggles on land and rural rights and rights over resources, the first point that I would like to make is that we have a long history, and a culmination of that sort of increased participation of women in agrarian movements was seen right in the last 10 or 15 years onwards. It's not only the Kisan movement which got the lenses and the national media and the discourse, where in fact Edward tried very hard to democratize that struggle and the stage, and we were not awfully successful because the whole place was dominated by all kinds of organizations. Yeah, but we see the whole question of rights over resources and land as a matter of social transformation. You cannot have an emancipatory goal of the peasants' movement without being anti-patriarchal. Because today we see that as land is privatized, land grabs are happening and all. It's no surprise, that conflicts over land are targeting women. Whether it's attacks on Dalit women, whether it's attacks on Adivasi women, questions of increasing violence against women, honor killings, the whole question of inheritance and bloodline, all these things are linked to control over resources also, the way we see it. I don't want to get much into that, but I want to put that on the table, that questions of inheritance, personal laws, and rights over land for women are something that should be discussed together. And I think some of the progressive peasants' movements and rural workers' movements have been also trying to do that. So this is one thing that we should keep in mind. But more importantly, I want to flag a very important issue that, in fact, Sagari raised at the end of her presentation, which is about the way in which women's savings are being mobilized in order to finance the digitization of agriculture and all other things through what I would call, what has been called the National Rural Livelihood Mission. The whole focus of the National Rural Livelihood Mission, as the finance minister told us in the budget speech, was to empower women, and they have 84.1 lakh self-help groups. Yeah, and these self-help groups are now going to be made into large enterprises through aggregation. And this aggregation is basically going to link them with big credit, which is private credit largely. Yeah, so if you look at the latest report of the NABARD, it tells you one particular interesting fact, that over the last 3 years, the direct public sector bank linkage in National Rural Livelihood Mission has come down by at least 4 to 5%. Correspondingly, the loans given by microfinance institutions to these women have gone up to almost 44 to 48%. We are talking about big small finance banks. These are big small finance banks, which have in the past led to women's suicides due to indebtedness. Ujjivan, Bandhan, Basics, all these other kinds of organizations. So a program that in the late 80s and the early 90s, which we saw as, something that will bring women together, create some pathway for an alternative, help us to sort of organize women, is now leading to debt traps and very high interest rates. And what the government is doing is, instead of providing direct loans to women through its public sector banking system, it is now giving priority sector loans and telling Adani and Ambani that we are not going to invest in infrastructure. So you make your bank correspondent and send them to these rural areas, and also expand your retail market. Now, in the morning when I was listening to the whole question of digitization, it sort of connected with me that the aggregation of women's savings, at which are basically given at relatively high interest rates, okay, because the government is only subsidizing you to the tune of 7% interest. They are giving much lower interest in certain sectors to corporates. So, 7% interest. And this project of aggregation, which is then going to be directly linked to the digitization of agriculture and all kinds of other things that are going on, I think I want to put that on the table for discussion. And as EDWA, we have been sort of fighting this battle at two fronts. Some of our units have actually approached even courts against the malpractices of microfinance institutions. Tamil Nadu was one success case in this actually. And apart from that, we are now talking about organizing these women, because associated with indebtedness, which is in all spheres now, associated with indebtedness is land loss, displacement, lack of access to commons, and a lot of violence, both in recovery places and emerging out of the stress of the indebtedness. So we are now having serious discussions with our like-minded organizations also about how to do this. But the short point that I also want to make through all this is that, have I run out of time?
No, you still have 2 minutes.
Is that the transformative project of Indian agriculture has to be also based on a process of social transformation. And this point EDWA has been making, and you will see that in the construction of the National Policy for Women in Agriculture, it was not only, a women's rights policy. Some of its basic principles were basically made to counter the larger neoliberal policy framework. Of course, it's an old policy. It needs to be seen, looked at. But I would also say that the provisioning of basic services is essential to women's rights and their anti-patriarchal struggle. And I think credit should also be considered a basic service in this, because this is something that is leading to abandoning of lands. Somebody asked about why lands are not being defended by people or they are not being organized. But I think that the creation of high levels of debt in our survey in the post-pandemic period of indebtedness of women, we found that the debt has gone up by almost 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. Even in the pre-pandemic period, it's gone up by 50% as the data shows you. So, when we talk of women's right, it cannot be a very, just a right in terms of their right to the homestead, all this. The power relation is also coming from the finance capital, and this has to be countered. And I think we are also discussing and we are also looking for ways in which we can organize women further on these issues. It's true of forest women also. Ashokda will be talking about that. So, and of agricultural workers. So, while rehabilitation, suicides, land rights for women remain the issues, this is also one issue that I wanted to highlight over here, because I thought that that fits into the larger discussion and also gives us a social perspective of where these technological interventions and all this are going. Thank you very much.